everybody, hope you're all doing really well and welcome to my spoiler-free review of Fireborne by Rosaria Minda. So, Fireborne is a book that I read last month and I've heard loads of people talking about it. A few other booktubers and stuff have read it and been not just gushing about it, absolutely raving about this book and just completely nothing but good things to say about it, and also about its sequel. So I thought I would read it, and it's got a very pretty cover. It was one that I'd seen those people talk about, and then you're sitting there thinking, how could this possibly live up to the expectations that I have for it? And then it did live up to my expectations. So as I said, this is going to be a spoiler-free review for Fireborne. If you've seen any of my other spoiler-free reviews, you'll know that I just I'll give you a quick synopsis of the book and I'll tell you just all the different things that I like about it and what I didn't like about it, and just keep things as spoiler-free and vague as possible to help you decide whether you want to read this book or not. If I do have anything spoilery to say, I will tackle that on at the end, but so far I don't think I've got anything else to say that I won't already cover in my spoiler-free section. So without any further ado, let's get into it. So I will just sort of read off the synopsis on the back of my book for this, because I'm not really sure how best to describe this book. So it's: Annie and Lee were only children when the revolution changed their world, giving everyone a chance to test into the governing class of dragon riders. Now they are both rising stars in the new regime, even though Annie's low-born family was executed by dragon fire, while Lee was born to the very aristocrats who used to rule the city. A childhood at the same orphanage forged their friendship, and 7 years of training have made them rivals for the top position in the dragon riding fleet. But everything changes when survivors from the old regime surface, bent on reclaiming their city. With war on the horizon, Lee must choose to kill the only family he has left or to betray everything he's come to believe in. And Annie must decide whether to protect her dearest friend or step up to be the champion her city needs. Loyalty and love are tested in this gripping adventure that asks what matters most, the family you were born into or the one you've chosen. So let's just start talking about the plot. I loved the pacing of this book and the plot and the way everything unfolded. The entire thing basically follows Annie and Lee as they compete against their classmates and each other to, become sort of top of the kind of dragon riding fleet, known as the first rider, and then the second sort of person is the alternus. And then also, within this regime, it's only been going for a few years, there is the matter of who's going to succeed the guy who's in charge. And it's kind of been whispered that this is going to be how they're going to choose who succeeds. Whoever becomes first rider may also then be the successor. There's looming war between their country and, the people from the old regime who perhaps survived. And one thing I love about this book is just the bubbling tension between Annie and Lee. The tension between the two friends regarding their backstories reaches a really interesting sort of boiling point throughout this book. I think this book does a really interesting dive into the aftermath of a revolution and the way things look and what different people from different walks of life's attitudes are towards the new regime that has been implemented, as well as pointing out how hypocritical perhaps the regime can be with some of the decisions that it makes and things that it does, even examining an idea where perhaps it starts to repeat the behaviours seen in the previous ruling regime that they overthrew in the first place, and sort of almost, circle of behaviour, history repeating itself sort of idea. It does sort of delve into that, and almost through these characters and through the decisions they make, you almost understand why they make the decisions that they do, but at the same time can understand from an objective point of view why it's wrong. And this regime also uses a lot of propaganda in its, to try and, keep things peaceful within its own sort of lower classes and stuff. It was an interesting sort of examination of that sort of thing, and how a regime that's born out of such violence would then try to smooth things over in the aftermath, sort of 10 years later sort of thing. And it's really interesting to sort of look at how they would then use propaganda and control over newspapers and stuff to try and do that. And I liked how the author brought that into the narrative and into the story. The plot is fast-paced, but still plenty of downtime in between what's going on, because this is definitely a character-driven story, and you're definitely given more than enough time with each of these characters, their relationships with other characters, how they feel about the situations and stuff. But it's just all paced so well in and amongst the story and in amongst this fast-paced plot. Yes, you're getting not repetitive sort of dragon fight scenes, but you are sort of thing, you've got they're in this competition, they've reached the quarterfinals and the semi-finals and the finals sort of thing. So you do sort of get 3 rounds of several dragon fights, but you understand the fights all feel different due to who's fighting who and how their characters come through in their fighting style. And I think that's just a really interesting way as well, just to look at the characters and look at how they behave and where they're at this point in the story through that fight, which is really something really interesting. As I said, this is definitely a character-driven story, and both of our protagonists are absolutely fantastic, as are the supporting cast. One of the things I love about Annie and Lee's protagonists is their dynamic. As I said, they have this intense tension, because Lee is the son of the people that killed Annie's family, and she knows that he's what his identity is, and he knows that she knows what his identity is.
We know they know we know.
But they're not talking about it. And they're not even acknowledging it. You know, it's sort of it's there. But then obviously with the looming war and Lee potentially having conflicting loyalties, it just starts to become completely unignorable. Unignorable? Is that a word? They just can't ignore it anymore, you know, because it is just, you know, they have to talk about it, but it just, they leave it for as long as possible, and it just creates this insane tension between the two, because they love and care for each other deeply, but they've just almost got this wall between them of this just unspoken thing that they cannot ignore. You know, you just watch it build and build and build, and you wonder when it's going to break, when it's going to bubble over, and what their friendship will look like in the aftermath. I really loved Lee. I found him to be an incredibly well-rounded character who wants to do well and succeed and has worked hard to get where he is, but still almost feels the not quite guilt for what his family did, but understands their role in the previous regime and almost understands why they had to be overthrown. You know, he's grown up out of this. Because, you know, obviously when he was younger, when he was a kid, he was 8 when the revolution happened, and just by chance somebody spared him and allowed him to go and live in the orphanage under a new name. And I just thought it was really interesting how, but you know, in flashback scenes that you see, you know, he spouts the rhetoric that his family have given him about how the lower classes, you know, deserve to be burned to death by dragon fire and deserve not to eat, and how the famine that happened wasn't actually real, yet Annie can sit there and say, I know it was real because I lost my family members to that. You know, he's grown out of that, and he sort of like almost looks back on the things he used to say in horror, and I think that makes for quite an interesting character, as somebody who grows out of the things that his family taught him and learns to... He's learned by this point to see things for himself and make his own decisions, and I think that's a really interesting character to follow. When he gets approached by the enemy in this book, and when it seems apparent that perhaps some of his family members are still alive, he goes into this incredible inner conflict of what should he do in this situation. Yes, that's his family and people he has these strong, good memories of, but then they're still... But he understands that the old regime and what his family did was wrong. And he also doesn't want to leave and betray his new family. You know, obviously he cares deeply for Annie, but also for all the other characters that you meet that I will mention in a minute. You know, he's got his comrades and his, you know, the people he's been fighting alongside and training with for years and years. This is his family now, and he understands this regime, and he almost agrees with the things he's been taught now. So to them to sort of be put in that... sort of rock in a hard place of both his families and almost feeling like he has to choose, which is such an interesting conflict to see him go through. Almost a blood family versus found family type of thing, which I really love to see. Annie's also a really great character. She's from a very low-ranking family, so she has to deal with a lot of the sort of prejudice that comes against her because of that, because for a long time dragon riders could only be those of noble class, but under this new regime anyone can be a dragon rider, anyone can rise up. So she's had to deal with that, also with sexism as well, because for a long time it was only really the men that were allowed to ride. So she and the other girls do have to deal with sexism, but she's sort of facing it kind of twofold with this classism as well, particularly from her instructor. So she feels like she doesn't belong, and she almost feels like she has to fight twice as hard to get to where she is. But then she too also feels that she's earned her place and has earned everything that she's sort of got it at this stage in the book. I enjoyed seeing her resent Lee a little bit because of his birthright, and she sort of has this opinion that everything comes easy to him because, you know, he got just taught all these extra little things when he was younger by his family and stuff, and just being aristocratic, he can just exist within their world so much easier than she can. And I thought it just added another layer to their already tense friendship, that she resents him his birthright, or resents him his birth. I don't know what I'm trying to say. Just resents him how he was brought up, sort of thing, and the class he was born into, and that was a really interesting like layer to add to their friendship. At the end, she does care deeply for him and knows not to judge him based on his class or his identity, really. And as well, just sort of the idea about the fact that they sort of work out pretty early on that when it comes down to the sort of final battle, they pretty much know it's going to be Lee versus Annie, because they are the sort of strongest two in the dragon riding fleet. And again, this sort of, you know, Annie's sort of deciding, actually no, she's not happy being number 2, she wants to be number 1, she wants to fight and prove that she can be in charge, sort of thing. And I loved seeing her reach that decision in the book, to finally decide that she doesn't want to, you know, be second best. She is the best, and she knows it, and she wants to prove it to the world. As well as her own internal conflict that she has once Lee kind of starts acting a bit strange when he's going through his own internal conflict of, you know, fan family versus blood family, once he gets approached by someone who can put him in contact with his family. You know, seeing her then sort of almost try to decide what to do. You know, this is Lee, she knows him, she loves him, but at the same time she's got this sort of duty to her job and her role where she's like, do I report him? Do I think he's going to defect? What do I do? So seeing them both go through their sort of like conflicts separately that are still like really tied together and stuff was just really, really interesting to see. As I said, their dynamic is just incredibly compelling and just has so many layers and depths to it, and oh, I just loved reading about these two characters. They actually spend a lot of this book ignoring each other because they're having fights, and as I said, this whole thing about Lee's identity coming up to the surface really, and she's kind of finding it hard to deal with that, and he doesn't really know how to talk to her either. So they spend a lot of this book ignoring each other and not talking, yet you still can understand how strong their bond is and strong their friendship is without them actually just talking all that much, you know, and I think that was just really well done by Rosario Munda. Also, it is kind of childhood friends to lovers, and I love it so much. Like, you really understand how their feelings are starting to go from just friends to perhaps something more, and it's almost like circumstances and their own like problems that are kind of stopping them from realising it in the first place. Also, there's this scene in here where they're holding hands at this party they're at, and let me tell you, that is steamier and hotter than any sex scene Sarah J Maas has attempted to write in her life. Like, hot damn. I was reading this and I was just like, excuse me, you're in public. Do you want to calm down a little bit, please? Thank you. Like, yeah, this is one scene where they're holding hands and it's just, it's so good. I love it. The supporting cast are also brilliant. You have Duck, who's sort of like almost Annie's friend, and he is very clearly in love with her. Everyone knows that he's in love with her, except Annie. But he's still not letting his sort of like feelings for Annie, and the fact that, you know, he perhaps knows throughout the book that he's not sure if she returns his feelings. So he's still a friend to her, and I really liked seeing that, you know, he's able to separate his own feelings from their friendship up to a point, and I thought that was really good. He's a really great character as well. He's sort of the laugh in the face of everything, almost like be as upbeat as is physically possible sort of person, and I thought he was really interesting to read about. And I liked that the author gave Annie another friend outside of Lee to have in this book that she's like almost just as close with. Another really interesting character is Power, and he's like the resident bully. He's from a sort of higher ranked class, and he sort of like, you know, uses that against Annie all the time. You know, he picks on her quite a lot for being quite lowborn. Yeah, he has some secrets of his own, and whilst he's still a dick by the end of the book, you almost kind of understand his attitude by the time you get to the end of the book and you learn the things about him that you do learn. I can never tell what he's going to do in the story, whose side he's going to be on next, because he like changes his attitude towards people and towards different things like that. And he just makes him such an unpredictable character, and I just love reading about him. He's just a fascinating addition to this cast of characters, and I cannot wait to see what he's going to do in the future books and how he's going to stir up trouble and do what he does. Like, love him. I also really liked Chrissa. I thought she was a really interesting character as well. And I loved how she was like a friend to both Annie and Lee, even though perhaps, you know, at the end of the day she's like, no, Lee's my friend. she's still friends with both of them, and I just really liked her as a character. I thought she was really fun. And then there's Atreus, which is the man in charge of the regime. This is the guy who led the revolution, who ordered the murder of Lee's family, who is now in charge, and they all sort of look up to him. He's not quite their hero, but you know, he's in charge, they all kind of want to succeed him, sort of thing. He's also a very interesting character. I like how this book examined his character and his motivations for revolution, whether they were personal or if they were sort of almost duty-bound patriotism sort of thing. As well as how he arrives at decisions that he makes. You know, there's some controversial things that he does in this book that the characters almost find themselves understanding because of the situations they found themselves in. You know, he's also the man who spared Lee's life as a child, and there's this sort of ongoing mystery as to how someone who was able to betray the people who considered him friends was able to make that decision when he killed everybody else. Especially when you learn sort of, you know, how ruthless he gets with his decisions, the reason why he then decided to spare an 8-year-old child, you know. It's just an ongoing mystery that I really enjoyed in this book. The world building of this book is really great. I love that, you know, as I said, it's sort of an examination of the revolution after a regime after the violent revolution. I loved the concept of the dragon riders and how they sort of just the way that the Rosaria built them up. You know, even small details like how the dragons don't breathe fire immediately, and they kind of have to wait for that to happen. It's something called sparking, and they don't know how it happens. They don't know what causes it to occur. And also just an interesting thing about how these dragons connect with their riders. It's not quite Aragon level, they can talk sort of thing, but they are sort of like connected by mind when they are riding, and they have to like detach themselves from their dragons when they're not riding anymore and things. And there's this concept of something called spilling over, which is where your emotions then start to spill over to your dragon and starts to affect them, which is sort of an interesting sort of thing that I'm really looking forward to reading more about, as to what this connection between dragon and rider actually is and how it can affect both of them. I also even just like details like how the dragon riders have got, you know, they wear their sort of like, I think it's called dragon skin or something. It's not quite dragon skin, but like, you know, it's like, you know, if you've read any book that has dragon riders, they've always got this tough material that, you know, is basically fireproof. But this book also then has that within their sort of gear, they've got like these cooling vents they can turn on that release this liquid that will help treat their burns, because it's sort of like, I don't know, it makes it so that they're not entirely fireproof, but they are, you know, they are protected to some level, but it's still sort of been like, but you will still get burned if you get scorched by a dragon. So, you know, here are some things you can apply immediately to try and minimise your burns, sort of thing, which I thought was a really interesting detail, like actually almost proving that Rosaria has actually sat and gone, right, what things would dragon riders actually need to have on them in the air when they're fighting. They also have an almost dystopian feeling class system, because, you know, if you've read all these dystopian books, you know, everyone gets sorted into their little things. In this book, the class systems are ranked by metal, you know, gold, silver, iron, and bronze and iron. But it doesn't really matter what class you're born into. Everybody takes a test, and then depending on their sort of, you know, skill levels and their intelligence, they can, you know, they'll get sorted into a class group that then allows them to be available to jobs that they would be suited to. And I thought that was a really interesting idea of, you know, trying to make things fair, and it doesn't really matter where you're born, you know, you'll be judged fairly against everyone else to then be able to perhaps become a gold class or a silver class. But then also they still point out how flawed that system is, because people from privileged families, so people who were born into higher classes, will probably almost automatically do better than people in other classes, because they've been taught to read. They've got their privilege, they have the resources to then do well in the exams and stuff. So it's almost sort of examining how, it sort of almost points out how hypocritical this system is, because yes, it's a good idea, but at the same time, not everybody has the same resources. So those born into lower classes will probably still stay in those lower classes because they don't have the resources to, you know, do well in these exams that the people in the gold classes do. You know, it's still a really flawed regime, it's not perfect, and it's called out by the characters, and I thought it was just a really interesting detail. This is an interesting idea of this poem called the Aurelian Cycle, which is also the name of the series. It's sort of like, almost like an Odyssey, like the Odyssey, or what's it called? What's that famous Greek poem? The Iliad or something? Stuff like that. it's kind of like all about dragons and the dragon riders in something called Dragon Tongue, which is like a language used by the higher classes. And it's a really interesting just sort of thing to just have this poem that's really integral to the previous ruling class's regime and what their thoughts on it were and what other people's opinions of it is, and almost like a sort of, I don't quite get its importance yet, but I have a feeling it's going to be very important, and it's just a really interesting just addition to this story. It's just this poem that they have to study and they have to examine and break down, and it's like actually quite important to their culture and stuff. Like, I'm really curious to see where that goes. They mentioned that Annie and a couple of the other characters are from somewhere called just Highlanders. They're from the Highlands. And honestly, I've decided that that means they're Scottish. Like, I don't know where this is like supposed to be set, if this is supposed to be like a fantasy UK or just a fantasy land that has something, you know, I don't know where this book's supposed to be like set or anything. So when they're like talking about the Highlands, and I'm fairly sure they mention like red hair and stuff, which is obviously very stereotypical Scottish, you know, and description as well when they're at this sort of dance where Annie and the other Highlander people start doing like, you know, traditional Highlander dancing. Very much reminds me of a description of a Kaylee. So I'm just sitting here like, is my girl Annie, can I claim her? Because it sounds like they're supposed to be like Scottish inspired, which, you know, obviously is cool for me. Somebody please tell me if I'm right with that, or if Rosario does just like come up with this whole thing and I've just decided to claim it. That's all I can really say about this book, I think. I think I've described everything I like about it. I just love this book so goddamn much. It was just so good. The tension between Annie and Lee as two main characters, the dynamic they have, who they were as actual people, were just, there's just such amazing characters in this story with such interesting motivations and things, and the plot's really great. I love the dragons, and I just love all the stuff that it does in this book. I just cannot recommend it. It's such a great first book. I cannot wait to read more of this series and see where it goes and what it does with and to these characters, and I'm just so excited to read more of this because it's so well written and I absolutely love it, and I can't recommend it enough. 5 out of 5 stars. But yeah, have you read Fireborne? What did you think of it? And have you read its sequels? Do you think I will enjoy them? Definitely let me know down in the comments. I would love to hear from you. If you've reached the end of this video, please feel free to give it a like, leave a comment below in the comments, and also feel free to subscribe. I post 2 times a week, usually on Tuesdays and Fridays. But anyway, thank you so much for watching. I will see you next time.